In this lesson, we are going to be looking at multiplying improper fractions and mixed numbers. In the previous section, we looked at multiplying proper fractions by proper fractions. And the rule for multiplying proper fractions by proper fractions was to multiply the top by the top and the bottom by the bottom, or the numerators and the denominators separately. In the case of mixed numbers and improper fractions, especially in the case of mixed numbers, you'll notice that these are not numerators or denominators, so you can't just multiply top by top and bottom by bottom. There's something that you need to do first. So I'm going to kind of go over the rule as well as the steps sort of at the same time. What you cannot do is just multiply the whole numbers, multiply the numerators, and multiply the denominators. That's the most common mistake. What you first have to do is actually get rid of the whole numbers by making improper fractions. So represent mixed and whole numbers as improper fractions. And that looks like the following. So this 2 1/3 becomes 7/3. If you forgot how to make these into improper fractions, you can look at some of your previous lessons. Essentially, I'm just doing 2 times 3 plus 1, right? It's two groups of 3 plus the 1 extra. That's where that's coming from. And 1 1/2 is a mixed number, and I can make that into 3/2. So step number 1, if you have any mixed or whole numbers, is to make them improper fractions. And the second thing to do is nice and straightforward, is now that you have just numerators and just denominators, you can only do this in this case now, is you are now allowed to do what we did with proper fractions, is to multiply the numerators and to multiply the denominators. Okay, so I can now move into doing numerator times numerator, so 7 times 3, and denominator times denominator, which is 3 times 2, and that becomes 21/6. The last thing that you always try to do is to make these into lowest terms, and I know that 3 goes into 21 and 6, so we have a final answer of 7/2, or if you wanted to make it a mixed number, 3 1/2. Either way. Okay, the last key idea here is, what do we do with just straight up whole numbers? We know how to make mixed numbers into improper fractions, but whole numbers we have problem making into improper fractions if you haven't practiced it before. So the thing about whole numbers, so if you look at this next example here, here's a whole number. It's just 2, and we want to make that into an improper fraction. So 2 actually represents 2 wholes, which is actually a denominator of 1. If it's 2 wholes, a whole is 1. So the important thing to do here is to express whole numbers as a fraction, not as a fraction, as a fraction with a denominator of 1. So step number 1 again is any mixed numbers or whole numbers we have to make into improper fractions. So we know how to do that with 4 3/5. 4 times 4 groups of 5 plus 3 is going to be 23/5. And that's going to be, now we know that 2 is the same as 2 wholes. So to make that into an improper fraction, it's just 2/1. And now we can multiply the numerators. 23 times 2, let me actually write that down. 23 times 2 is 46. And multiply the denominators. 5 times 1 is 5. And in this case, they can't be reduced. Nothing goes into both 46 and 5 commonly. So our last thing here is, if you can, always represent your answer in lowest terms.